Before the veil, before the harem, Middle Eastern women were not hidden, they were headline makers. They ran temples that functioned like banks, city halls, and logistics hubs. They sealed clay tablets with their names, financed caravans that stitched empires together, and sang hymns that outlived the kings who paid for their statues. From early Sumer to the early Islamic centuries, though their names thinned to rumor, filtered through other people's pens. What changed? Law codes hardened, empires centralized, elite seclusion grew. Later storytellers wrote a new myth over older realities. Yet the traces remain, under dunes and behind glass. Contracts, hymns, statues, and gravestones, all whispering a different story. If this sounds modern, it is. Payrolls, credit lines, and public relations already existed written in clay. Here is the loop we will close. The earliest known author to sign a work was a Middle Eastern woman. Who was she, and why did history almost forget her?
Imagine a mud brick skyline, where the tallest building is not a palace, but a temple terrace, stacked like a man-made mountain. Inside, ledgers whisper. Barley is measured by the scoop. Tall, vertical looms hum in long halls, and officials roll cylinder seals across damp clay. In early Mesopotamia, temples were not only shrines. Temples doubled as bank and city hall, where offerings, wages, and vows met the same seal. The Entu, high priestess, bound to a major deity, oversaw estates, scheduled rituals, and authenticated transactions with her own seal. The Nabataean, vowed businesswomen, especially at Sippar, did not marry or bear heirs, yet they bought property, leased fields, and lent silver within the temple's economic orbit. Tablets read like a city thinking out loud, barley in, silver out, and the signature that makes a voice visible, a priestess's sealing, a Nabataean's authorization, an Entu's estate account. Some of the earliest personal marks in the record appear not on grand dedications, but on everyday receipts, contracts, and inventories tied to women's offices. Behind those lines of cuneiform lies industry. Temple complexes ran breweries and vast textile workshops where thousands of women produced standardized cloth for wages and rations. Warehouses moved grain and oil in quantities that fed cities and provisioned caravans. Authority came with constraints. Family guardians could interfere. Vows shaped inheritance. Male priests held many top posts, and royal power increasingly pulled resources toward the palace. The women's presence can feel like a watermark, faint until you learn the pattern, then suddenly everywhere. A shipment countersigned to a date orchard leased by a Nabataean, and a lawsuit when it is damaged. An offering list that doubles as a logistics plan, moving grain, oil, and labor across a city on a sacred timetable. Before kings chiseled their victories into stone, sacred offices already functioned as executive suites. The ziggurat's long shadow was not cast by royal inscriptions alone. It fell across ledgers where women's names altered the flow of value, and it points toward the workshops where pay and policy were woven together. Walk into a long hall where the air smells of lanolin and damp reed mats. Tall vertical looms stand in rows, threads drawn tight like harp strings, and the rhythm is steady. Beat, pull, tie. This is not cottage craft. It is urban infrastructure. In Mesopotamian cities, textiles and beer were more than goods. They were budgets in motion. Cloth clothed workers and paid soldiers. Beer functioned as wages you could drink, barter, or save. Women stood at the heart of both systems, from teams that spun and wove standardized cloth to brewers who turned grain into rations that kept an army of laborers moving. Production was not faceless. Behind the rows, a supervisor clicks a cylinder seal and tallies allotments. Wool in, Yarn out, finished bolts stacked to the ceiling. Rations are recorded like paychecks: bread, beer, oil, scaled by skill and season. A skilled weaver's name repeats across tablets with better quotas and extra oil. A novice's line shows fewer liters and a shorter cloth. Some overseers, women among them, carry seals of their own, authorizing transfers, dispatching bales to merchants, and issuing travel rations to couriers along the canals. The workshop doubles as a ledger for the city. Standardized bolts can stand in for silver. A shipment of blankets settles a temple obligation. A year's worth of tunics provisions the garrison. When grain harvests dip, the looms take up the slack. When war demands uniforms, the hall answers at speed. The steady beat of cloth becomes policy in motion. The system has teeth. Rations as pay tie workers to storehouses. Missed quotas mean dock shares. Bad wool or broken looms ripple panic through a neighborhood. Yet the same records show elasticity. Reassigned tasks, seasonal bonuses, a supervisor's judgment softening a hard number. Follow the paper trail, clay really, and a city comes into focus. Canals to mills, mills to breweries, breweries to workshops, workshops to treasuries. Women are not footnotes here, they are gears. Each bolt of cloth and each jar of beer is a line in the civic budget, measured by the scoop, sealed with a name, and moved by hands that kept the city solvent.
A courtyard, a bench, a clay tablet smoothed with a reed. A woman steps forward to reclaim her orchard after a flood nudged a neighbor's fence across the line. The judge listens, witnesses speak, the scribe writes. Law here is not a marble ideal. It is paperwork, memory, and oaths to Shamash, the sun god who sees. Women move through this system as parties to contracts, not as rumors. A marriage begins with assets, a bride price from his side, a dowry from hers. The dowry is not a gift that vanishes into his pocket. It is a portfolio of textiles, silver, tools, sometimes fields, managed for her security. The same clauses that protect can pinch. If he takes a second wife, if she leaves without cause, if sickness strikes, the tablet spells who keeps what, who pays debts, who houses the children. Household politics can squeeze a widow or daughter. A bad harvest can turn credit into chains. So the tablets learn to hedge. Prenuptial terms specify returns without deduction. Divorce documents list back wages for work inside a shop. Adoption contracts let a daughter inherit like a son and bind her to care for aging parents. Credit runs on trust and seals. Women lend silver at interest, front cloth to traders, and pledge jewelry or grain as collateral. Miss a payment, and a carefully chosen witness list can tilt a case, unless the court's cool formula lands, she has proved her claim. The courtroom is not empty theater. Oaths summon Shamash. Perjury risks fines, shaving, even exile. Outcomes can be stark. A wife deserted without cause leaves with her full dowry and a share of profits she helped build. A Nabataean, a vowed businesswoman at Sapar, leases a date grove and wins damages when it is ruined. A widow keeps her shop, adopts an heir, and secures her line. Law can bruise, yet it binds protection to property and gives women a voice that moves silver, land, and labor. Read across hundreds of cases, the pattern is plain. Risk is real, so is recourse. Written in clay and enforced in the open air, where everyone can see. Dust lifts from a donkey train as it crests the Taurus. At Kültepe, ancient Kanesh, bundles are untied, seals cracked, and prices argued under timbered roofs. Tin and textiles move one way, Anatolian silver the other. Back in Assur, wives write on clay with a trader's precision, closing gaps that mountains open. Their tablets travel in clay envelopes, with string impressions, and the lines read like balance sheets treated with care. Send fine silver, not adulterated. Do not buy coarse wool. The thread must be tight. The margin is this.
A shipment is not only a bale, it is specifications, reputation, and timing. Distance invites risk, caravans can vanish, customs bite, partners delay, and rumors of brigands flutter along the road. So the women spread shipments across multiple caravans, pair high-grade cloth with tin to offset fees, and hold stock when whispers say prices will soften at the harem. They keep ledgers at home, names, weights, interest dates, stacked in baskets beside the door. One letter recalculates a partner's obligation down to the shekel. Another names the witnesses who saw a loan sealed and sets a deadline for payment before court is summoned. The household acts like a farm. A wife advances yarn to spinners, rejects bad lots, seals finished bales with her stamp, and dispatches them with couriers she trusts by name. She negotiates with in-laws over dowry shares tied up in trade, fronts small loans to neighbors at modest interest, and instructs her husband without apology. If the Kanesh rate dips, sell locally. If tin cheapens, buy heavily and ship later. When a partner defaults, she cites guarantors and lays out the path to the harem's bench. Read across these letters and a voice emerges, fluent in thread counts, alloy purity, freight risk, and court procedure. Not a lone exception, but a working system. Husbands on the road, wives at the hub, both turning clay into credit and credit into caravans that stitched two cities into a single reckoning economy. Before we move on, a quick thought for you. If you lived in that world, would you rather run the caravan routes or the ledgers back in a sewer? Let me know below. Your choice says a lot about how you see history's gears turning. Wind off the Mediterranean carries resin and salt across a coast stitched with harbors like Tyre, Sidon, and Dor, where freighters bob at quays and warehouses breathe cedar. Power here did not live only in palaces. It moved with caravans and cargo lists, and women stepped into that current in ways remembered by scripture and stone together. Biblical narratives are used here as literary historical sources, read alongside inscriptions and archaeology. Deborah's story opens under a palm in the hill country, where petitioners line up and a prophet judge weighs disputes. She summons the general Barak, names the ground, and sets terms that credit victory to a woman. The song that follows, sharp and archaic and full of place names, reads like field notes from an age when charisma and covenant could draft armies. Generations later, Huldah speaks in Jerusalem's new court quarter. Officials arrive with a scroll found during temple repairs. She authenticates it, issues judgment in the name of Israel's God, and her words set reform in motion. Neither tale treats a woman's authority as a sideshow. Both make it an axis where law and war pivot. Along the coast, inscriptions thicken the picture. The long Phoenician text of Eshmunazar II names his mother, Queen Amstart of Sidon, as temple builder and co-ruler, tying piety to infrastructure and trade. At Sarepta, workshops turned out purple dye and fine pottery. Household shrines share space with loom weights and storage jars, rooms that were both devout and industrial. In merchant neighborhoods, stamped jar handles, calibrated weights, and balance pans sketch out a daily calculus where cloth, wine, and oil crossed decks and borders. Women's names surface on dedications and funerary stones as donors, patrons, and guardians of family property. Seers, queens, traders. Different registers, same through mine. Decision-making in public. A judge under a palm adjudicates. A prophetess verifies a law. A queen funds stone and cedar to anchor her city's gods and its commerce. For a modern ear, think judges, auditors, and chief financial officers. Read together, text and artifact converge on a Levant where women spoke verdicts, signed projects, and steered the flowed goods along a very busy coast. In a storeroom at Persepolis, jars breathe the smell of wine and wheat. Clay tags hang from basket cords. A scribe presses a cylinder seal with rosettes and a royal hero wrestling a lion, then numbers a distribution. So many liters to so many hands for so many days. The Achaemenid Empire ran on this math. The fortification and treasury tablets track rations with clockwork regularity. Grain, wine, beer, and oil are measured for work crews, specialists, children, and the officials who move them across provinces. Women are inside the ledger, not at its margin. Work groups list female spinners, millers, and brewers. Their shares scale with skill, season, and assignment. Some are supervisors, named and counted, issuing allotments to others and ordering transfers down the road. Travel appears as arithmetic. Extra rations on the road are calculated by days and head counts for crews walking between estates, depots, and construction sites. In one cluster of cablets, a high-ranking woman, her name stamped with an elegant seal, controls estates scattered across fars, dispatches wine by the 1,000 liters, and pays messengers to ferry instructions between sites. The paperwork can feel intimate. Pregnant workers receive increased shares. Women with newborns draw additional rations for a set number of months. A note records a midwinter bonus, wine in place of grain, when a crew finishes early. Yet hierarchy sits in every line. Many laborers are dependents tied to royal or estate storehouses. Rations function like company scrip. Overseers sign. Common names are tallied and vanish. A woman can command a workshop, but she answers to the same imperial spine that threads the empire from Sardis to Susa. What emerges is not a single palace feeding a single city. It is a logistics web. Depots pass jars to couriers. Couriers pass tablets to scribes. Seals move authority along like a relay baton. Women appear at each link, receiving, supervising, traveling, and authorizing, so that cloth reaches garrisons, stonecutters eat through the cold months, and canals open on schedule. Think HR and supply chain software written in clay. Power was not only carved at Naqsh Rostam, it was poured, scoped, and signed, one ration at a time, by hands that kept the lines moving.
Heat shivers above a ribbon of camels drifting toward an oasis of date palms, a whitewashed shrine, and market stalls in woven shade. In North and West Arabia, trade did not flow in straight lines. It leapt from water to water, from sanctuary to sanctuary, where Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat stood like gatekeepers of luck and law. Pilgrims sought favor, caravans sought safe passage, and the sacred precincts, ringed by inviolable ground, turned belief into logistics. Think of them as free trade zones with divine security and community enforcement. The desert was not empty, and these cults were not only men's business. Inscriptions from oases, carved into Danitic, Safayitic, and Nabataean scripts, preserve women's names as dedicants and donors. A woman's offering might underwrite a vow for a son on the road, dedicate a niche for a goddess, or mark the boundary of a protected grove where cutting wood drew a fine and shedding blood was a crime. The poetry that wandered with the tribes maps the same network. Verses remember patrons who fed travelers, arbiters who settled fights, and sharp-tongued poetesses whose praise or satire could push a tribe's standing like a hand on a scale. Power here took several shapes. It could be custodianship, managing access to a sanctuary, allocating market plots on feast days, and assigning water turns when caravans swelled the crowd. It could be capital, lending grain and dates from household stores to outfit a journey, financing a guard detail, or buying into a spice load from the south. It could be voice, composing a poem that stitched generosity to status, calling witnesses at the well, or invoking a goddess as guarantor when two parties swore peace. Caravans needed rules more than walls. The goddess gave the rules of face, The oasis gave them teeth, and women, embedded in shrine, household, and market, made sure they held. Step into the shade, and you enter a zone where offerings function as contracts. Water rations count like coin, and a name chiseled on stone outlasts a dozen dust storms because it is tied to the place that keeps the road alive.
Sandstone glows like embers at Petra as a procession slips past facades cut into the cliff. Names are everywhere, chiseled on door lintels, stair risers, and tomb faces. And women's names are not ornamental. In the Nabataean realm, legal formulae on rock and papyrus show property moving in women's hands. A house is recorded as belonging to X, daughter of Y. A widow leases a vineyard to a tenant. A debt is acknowledged to a female creditor with witnesses and a date. Marriage does not erase a signature. A wife can keep her dowry as separate capital, bring suit, witness agreements, and initiate dissolution when terms fail. The reliefs match the text. Women are shown frontally, jewelry bright against carved folds, presented as persons who owned, vowed, and litigated, not as shadows of a male guardian. Think property deeds etched in stone. Cross the basalt deserts to Palmyra, and the script shifts to bilingual. Greek stands beside Palmyrene Aramaic on tariffs, dedications, and the city's tall tower tombs. Epitaphs read like microbiographies. NN, daughter of NN, of the clan of blank, who built this for herself and her descendants. Maternal lines surface alongside paternal. Donor texts tie women to civic religion as they endow altars, pay for statuary, and oversee cult banquets. Portraits insist on presence. A hand gathers a mantle, fingers lift a spindle whorl or a tablet, gestures that speak status and stewardship in a single pose. Where does legend end and inscription begin? Zenobia, the queen who defied Rome, claimed learned ancestry and minted her face on coins. The stones around her are quieter and more granular. Councils, caravan magnates, priestly families and women within them finance temples, own tomb complexes, and move money into the arteries that made Palmyra rich. Her titles appear in the record, but the wider corpus shows a city where authority is an orchestra, not a solo, and female notes are audible far beyond the palace. Read together, Petra and Palmyra refuse the simple story. Law carved in Nabataean letters and lives frozen in Palmyrene reliefs map women into ownership, litigation, and patronage. Empire can rearrange borders. In these cities of stone, a name carved deep can still claim space, wealth, and memory long after caravans fall silent. If stories like these keep shifting how you picture the ancient world, you'll fit right in with us here at Armchair Archaeology. Subscribe so you don't miss the next excavation into forgotten connections.
Start in a palace where corridors multiply like mirrors. Access is the currency. Who sees the king? Who hears a petition? Whose hand passes the seal? In Neo-Assyria, queens share banquets and gardens with kings. One relief shows a ruler reclining while his queen sits opposite, cup in hand, attendants at the ready. Women's quarters exist, but they are part of court choreography, not a hidden world. Centralization breeds danger. Coups, poison, rival factions. Access tightens. Achaemenid tablets mention women of the court drawing rations, traveling with escorts, and receiving allotments by the 1,000 leaders. Architecture at Susa and Persepolis turns privacy into policy, with screened spaces, regulated corridors, and gatekeepers who decide which message arrives and which dies outside the door. Seclusion grows as an administrative technology, a rule of access that manages bodies and information. When Greek and Roman writers peer in from very far away, they turn restricted access into fantasy. The harem becomes a stage set for excess and indolence, a moral tale about the East. Later, European painters add silks and languor, and travelers repeat hearsay as ethnography. One word hardens. Harem, from haram, meaning restricted or sanctuary, slides from a rule about who may enter to a myth about what women do inside. The ledgers and court records refuse that story. Abbasid and Ottoman documents list salaries, curricula, and promotions. The inner palace is a school and a bureaucracy. Eunuchs manage doors and documents. Women manage endowments, arrange marriages, and sponsor scholars. A sultan's mother issues orders that move governors and gold. An imperial consort funds a fountain and a hospital with a waqf, a charitable endowment, whose clauses run pages. Qadi courts record veiled litigants arguing property and custody in precise legal prose. Seclusion limits movement, yes. It also concentrates leverage where proximity to the sovereign can tilt the empire's balance with a word. So the story changes shape. Elite seclusion is real, but not universal. It is urban, high status, and variable across time. Markets hum with unveiled vendors. Villages ignore palace etiquette, and pilgrimage collapses distance. The harem myth flattens a spectrum into a silhouette. The archive restores depth. Walls as management, screens as strategy, and women as actors whose power traveled the same corridors that kept them out of sight.
A fragment of clay with a thumbprint, a chipped statue base with 3 lines of text, a scuffed wall where a name was scratched before the plaster dried. The past does not arrive as a chorus, it arrives as murmurs. Piece them together and women step back into frame. Seals roll the first clues across clay. Tiny cylinders leave whole scenes in a single turn. A woman's name, her office, the transaction she authorizes. Account tablets echo the scene with day-by-day tallies, wool in and cloth out, where the same female supervisor's name repeats across months. Hymns carry a first-person voice forward, preserved in schoolrooms that prized cadence as much as theology. Stone joins in. Nabataean lintels name a daughter as owner. Palmyrene epitaphs list clan, gifts, and a tomb built for herself and her descendants. Even graffiti helps. Saphitic scratches in basalt show travelers, women among them, marking vows, grief, and routes. The trail bent when Modernize arrived. 19th century collectors favored royal bombast and exotic scenes. Harem fantasies flooded canvases while labels trimmed women to footnotes. Early translations sometimes slid female names into masculine defaults, and economic records were read as faceless, so the signatures inside them blurred. A single misread word, guardian taken as husband, or woman seal read as household seal, could tilt a whole narrative. Recovery looks like patience and better questions. Philologists re-edit tablets and restore feminine endings. Epigraphers re-photograph weathered stones at sunrise to catch faint strokes. Archaeologists read context, the loom weights beside a shrine and the jar stamps in a courtyard, to see where work and worship overlapped. Science lends a hand. Residue analysis confirms breweries. Fiber studies tie workshops to trade routes. 3D scans pull erased lines back into legibility. Think forensics and version control applied to clay and stone. We're not finding a new past, we're learning to read the old one correctly. What emerges is not a miracle discovery, but a sharpened focus. Women were already inside the archive, on seals, in ledgers, and on stone, waiting for us to stop asking only king-shaped questions. Each reread inscription and each relabeled case nudges rumor toward record. The sand did not bury a separate history, it scattered a shared one. We are learning to hear the quieter parts.
We started with a whisper under the sand, and here is the voice. Enheduanna, High Priestess of Nana at Ur, the earliest known author to sign her work. Her hymns speak in the first person, fusing devotion and statecraft so cleanly that copyists preserved her eye for centuries. Her survival highlights the pattern. Women's labor, law, and leadership did not vanish. They were reframed, filtered through scribes, palaces, and later storytellers, until names thinned to rumor. Look again, and the landscape changes. Temples read like banks and city halls. Workshops function like payroll and procurement. Courts operate like small claims and family law. Caravans run as firms with risk desks. And sanctuaries work as logistics hubs. Queens judge. Prophetesses authenticate. Supervisors seal. Patrons endow. And merchants calculate across Sumer, the Levant, Persia, Arabia, Nabataean, and Palmyra. The so-called harem myth shrinks a spectrum into a silhouette. The archive restores depth. Seals, ledgers, inscriptions, and graffiti were never quiet. We simply were not listening for them. If the first named author was a woman, what else sits mislabeled in our museums and footnotes? Tell us in the comments which trace surprised you most, or which city you want next, Ur, Petra, or Palmyra. If this reframe sharpened your view, tap like, subscribe, and check the pinned comment for ways to support new digs. Share this episode with someone who still thinks ancient women lived only behind curtains, because the tablets say otherwise. Until next time, keep questioning, stay curious, and remember, the ledgers never forgot her, even when we did.